Hey guys, welcome to chapters 3 and 4 in Mississippi Studies this week. As we mentioned, we won't have class, so yay! But what you will have to do is watch this video. Hopefully you also have your set of notes that I passed out last week. If not, go ahead and get those available along with your textbook. If you lost them or missed class and didn't get them, I will post them in Canvas so that you can print them off. But you will need that. What we're going to do is as I go, just like we do in class, as I go through the slides, I'll let you know what to fill in the blanks and what to put a little star by with things that are going to be on the midterm. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Don't need to worry about that. But let's talk about today's daily gospel truth. This says, who, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. This goes on to say that therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This is just a great basic truth about who Christ is. He is in the form of God, which tells us that he is equal with God. And even though he didn't count himself that way. He humbled himself and he became a servant. And this often makes me think about the scene in John where he's washing his disciples' feet, which, if you know anything about that, is one of the lowest forms of servanthood that can be done, and he did that to make a point. And not only did he lower himself to the status of washing his disciples' feet, he told them and gave them a command to do the same for one another. Let us not be haughty. If our Lord and Savior can humble himself, then by all means we should do the same. All right. Well, great news, no quiz today. In lieu of a quiz, what you will do when we meet again on September 11th is you will turn in these notes that you're taking today, and you'll get points on those. So, yay. All right. So for today, you should have read chapters 3 and 4. You didn't have, I know it was 2 chapters, which is kind of a lot, but you didn't have to read all of chapter 3. You only had to read the transportation section of chapter 3. Hopefully you saw that in Canvas, and then all of chapter 4. I also posted a video on there for it's a video about sharecropping. It is I posted it a little late, so if you didn't catch it, it's okay. Do go back and watch it though. There are no points for watching it, but it was really interesting and it had some really interesting insight into sharecropping in the Delta and what that looked like from the perspective of a person who grew up on the plantation sharecropping. So it was really interesting. Go ahead, pull out your notes, and we'll get started. Okay, so Mississippi's settlement patterns and economic growth have always been directly linked to transportation. Before European settlement, most transportation was by river via steamboats and others. By 1900, river travel had been replaced by railroads. And then in the 1920s and 30s, automobiles became the main mode of transportation. So you should have in those blanks transportation, river, railroads, and automobiles. Right? Jumping ahead. As a reminder, of what we learned last week. This will be on your midterm. Mississippi River has two major tributaries in the state. Those are the Yazoo River and the Big Black River. And if you look at this map, you can see them both on the map. There's little arrows pointing to them. And it just gives a good visual of how economy got pushed into the state via these rivers from the main river of the Mississippi. Rivers and streams furnish the earliest transportation routes in Mississippi. So that's point 3A. Rivers and streams furnish the earliest transportation routes in Mississippi. La Salle and other French explorers came down the Mississippi from Canada. But here was the deal with flatboats. They were not powered in any way, and so they could go downstream really easily, but they couldn't get back upstream. And so what they had to do was they would send goods and things downstream toward Mississippi. And once they got all of their goods and things off the boats, they dismantled them and then sold the boat for lumber. Then came along the steamboat, and steamboats caused transportation revolution on the Mississippi River because it opened up the lands along the banks of the Yazoo and the Big Black. So this is what we were talking about, looking at that map from a couple of slides ago. The invention of steamboats helped boats move upriver, and so they were able to get into areas of Mississippi that other boats previously hadn't been able to access. So that was huge. So point A there, steamboats caused a transportation revolution on the Mississippi River and open up the lands along the banks of the Yazoo and Big Black to cotton plantations. So steamboats underwent rapid technological improvements to better suit them for the western rivers. And western steamboats had to be built with broad, flat bottoms. Early steamboats were designed primarily for freight, but passenger accommodations were plentiful and luxurious. So they were primarily designed for freight, but passenger accommodations were plentiful and luxurious. Steamboats, like we said, could bring goods upstream and transport the cotton out to the market. So not only were they good for bringing in things deeper into Mississippi, but they also could take the cotton and move it up the river to other states. Steamboating in the western rivers was disrupted by the Civil War. And the Civil War had spurred on the growth of railroads, which was the steamboat's chief rival. The earliest and most famous road in Mississippi history was the Natchez Trace Parkway. And this will be on your midterm, so put a little star by that. The Natchez Trace Parkway, the most famous road in Mississippi history. And there's a really cool map of it right here on the screen. It shows where it starts in Natchez and goes through the states of Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, and ends in Nashville. The route ran through the lands of the Choctaw and Chickasaw Indians, and treaties with the tribes allowed the road to be built. The Indian Trail already existed over most of the route, and the work of widening the road was done by U.S. soldiers. So that's point B there, U.S. soldiers. Accommodations called stands were built at frequent intervals so that travelers could stop and eat and sleep. And these little dots on this map show all the different stands along the trace. The new road was financed by the U.S. Post Office. because the road would be used to carry mail. So U.S. Post Office. And the distance was from Nashville to Natchez, and it was 501 miles. All right. Then enter railroads. And railroads had an advantage over steamboats because steamboats are stuck with being in water. Can't go past the water. Whereas railroads could be built anywhere. They could come deeper into Mississippi, into the state. They were faster and safer than steamboats, and they could haul just as much freight. So railroads were faster and safer than steamboats. Railroads opened settlement and economic development in areas that previously were inaccessible by steamboats, which was a huge advantage. One area that was especially open to this economic development was the Piney Woods. That's point D, that's Piney Woods. You can go ahead and put a star by that. We're going to hit it again in just a little bit when we're talking about how these railroads end up leading to a lumber boom that really impacted the Piney Woods. When Union armies invaded Mississippi in 1862, their first objectives were the railroads. So think about it. They saw how much the railroads were impacting and helping the state of Mississippi. So they wanted to destroy those. So, you got to hit them where it hurts. And so the Civil War destroyed the railroad industry, agricultural industry, and after the war, cotton was in short supply and prices were high. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm bouncing around. Point E, many of the railroads were destroyed during the Civil War, but by the year 1880, a great railroad boom began. I'm sorry, I hope that wasn't too confusing to y'all. All right, automobiles, trucks, and buses began appearing in large numbers in Mississippi during the 1920s. So that's that first blank under highways is automobiles. Yet, as the number of automobiles steadily increased, the demand for government to build paved roads and highways became stronger. As highways improved, railroads went into decline. All right. That's pretty much it for chapter 3. We're going to jump into chapter 4 and talk about before the Civil War, Mississippi's economy was overwhelmingly rural. This is worded a little bit differently on your midterm, and we'll hit it again in a minute, but this will be on your midterm. Here's what you need to know. Before 1940, Mississippi's economy was overwhelmingly rural. Okay? I think that's kind of common sense. I think y'all can figure that out, but just know for the midterm, before 1940, Mississippi was overwhelmingly rural. Okay? Mississippians identified with their counties, and the entire population of the Mississippi Territory in 1800 numbered only 7,600. So all of the Mississippi Territory in 1800, which, if you'll remember, included Mississippi and Alabama at that time, only 7,000 people. Today, the population of Mississippi is 3.15 million. The population of the city of Jackson is 160,000, and the population of Flowood is around 10,000. So that gives you some idea of the difference. While 52% of all Mississippians are listed on the U.S. Census as living in rural areas, a large percentage of those, perhaps as many as 50%, work in town. Almost 90% of Mississippi's urban population lives in the Jackson area along the Gulf Coast or in the Memphis area. All right, some of those were just little fun facts. They weren't necessarily on your sheet, but we'll jump back to the sheet. All right. Let's see. Let's go back to economy. Before the Civil War, Mississippi's economy had been overwhelmingly rural. The state depended primarily on growing cotton. And the Civil War destroyed the agricultural economy. And after the war, cotton was in short supply and prices were high. So this is on your midterm. This is point C. The Civil War destroyed the agricultural economy, and after the war, cotton was in short supply because prices were high. So from 1880 to 1930, railroaders and lumbermen created a great timber and lumber boom in the piney woods. After World War II, the growth of industry in Mississippi began to overshadow both agriculture and lumber. All right. This poster here that you're looking at, this was the Mississippi Advertising Commission advertisement in August of 1937, which ran in Time Magazine, Business Week, the New York Times, places like that. And they were all trying to really hit home that Mississippi was going industrial. After the Civil War, newly built roads allowed loggers to get trees far into the interior and enabled lumbermen to ship logs to the sawmills and to ship lumber out by rail. The application of steam power to sawmills allowed the establishment of a number of mills along the Gulf Coast after 1840. A great boom in rail building came to Mississippi in the 1880s. Railroads were seen as the solution to Mississippi's transportation problems, and every town sought rail service. Main rail lines connected sawmill towns with lumber ports on the Gulf Coast or with markets north of the Ohio River. And then this next point, again, goes back to what we were talking about. You'll want to make a note of this. This is point E under timber. It says, without railroads, the great piney woods lumber boom of 1880 and 1930 could not have occurred. What you need to know for the midterm, there was a great lumber boom during this time, and it happened in the piney woods region of Mississippi. Okay, lumber boom, piney woods region. That's what you need to know for the midterm. All right. Two of the most important railroads in the lumber boom were the New Orleans and Northeastern, and the Gulf and Ship Island. So Northeastern, the New Orleans and Northeastern was called the NO and NE, and the Gulf and Ship Island was called the G and SI. Okay. Neither Hattiesburg nor Laurel even existed in 1883 when the New Orleans and Northeastern Railroad was completed. Okay. So in 1883, Hattiesburg and Laurel didn't even exist. And what's really cool, 17 years later, Hattiesburg had over 50 sawmills and 12,000 citizens. And by 1915, Laurel held 10,000 people and was the largest lumber center in the state. Pretty cool. So lumber was definitely booming during this time. The city of Gulfport owed its origins to the Gulf and Ship Island Railroad. It was built as a shipping port to handle lumber coming down the railroad. And Mississippi became one of the nation's largest lumber producing states. The peak of the boom came between 1908 and 1915 when Mississippi ranked third among the states in the production of lumber. The downside, though, and we've talked about this briefly in other classes, is that by 1930, after 50 years or 50 years after the lumber boom had begun, the pine timber was almost completely gone. So your blank there on number 4 is gone. By 1930, 50 years after the lumber boom, the pine timber was almost gone. Why did that happen? Well, because the lumbermen had cut the forest down without replanting. The destruction had been made worse by big lumber companies' use of skidding. Skidders were cranes or booms and equipment with winches mounted to rail cars. The winches then dragged the logs over the land to the railroad cars, scraping and crushing young trees as they came. Only after the destruction of the forests did any large attempts at reforestation begin or succeed. As the pine forest began to be replanted largely through the efforts of the state and federal governments, the timber and lumber industry began to revive. While the lumber boom was not returned, forest products are still a mainstay of Mississippi's economy. All right. As a reminder, one of the questions on your midterm is what destroyed Mississippi's cotton economy? And that is the Civil War. So that's actually right under sharecropping under point 5. The very first one, point A, says the Civil War destroyed Mississippi's blank economy. That's cotton. And that's a question on your midterm. It's kind of reversed on your midterm. It says what destroyed Mississippi's economy, and the answer is the Civil War. Before the Civil War, Mississippi was the nation's leading cotton producing state. And then after the Civil War, sharecropping came into existence. So like I said, there is a video that I posted on Canvas. It's about 17 minutes long. It's an interview of a man who grew up in a sharecropping family. He was one of 9 children. And it's just really impactful and powerful to hear what life was like for him as a sharecropper. The reason I'm kind of hitting home on this is going to be one of your essay questions on the midterm. There's a pretty decent sized section about sharecropping in your book in chapter 4. It's on pages 67 to 71, so you might want to write that down right next to this section in your notes. Midterm essay exam, and this comes from pages 67 to 71 in your book, and it talks all about sharecropping. So we're going to hit it here. We're going to hit some of the main points here, but you need to go and read up on it and make sure you have it in your mind what sharecropping is like and what the outcome of it was. So the sharecropper would agree to work the farm of a planter. Sorry, my phone's going off. The sharecropper would agree to work the farm, and the planter would agree to provide what the sharecropper needed for planting, like seeds and tools. So essentially what happened was the sharecroppers lived on these people's land, so it wasn't their land. They lived on someone else's land, and then they would agree to work the land for them, and they in return would give them things that they needed, like tools and seeds to do the planting. And they also would extend to them a line of credit at the local store that allowed them to have food, clothing, meet any needs that they need to meet. And then at the end, or when the crop was harvested, the sharecropper would receive a small portion of the profits from the harvest. It was supposed to be 50-50, but it apparently wasn't a lot of the time. The profit the sharecropper received most of the time did not even cover his debts that he had at the town store. And so he would still continue to be in debt. And I want you to underline this one line that's on your notes here. It says it was an awful cycle of poverty. It just kept getting worse and worse. It was like they could never get out of the debt that they owed. So make sure you go back and read through that. I'm sorry, I didn't hit it. I'm going to put these up right here. So again, tenants made an agreement with the landowners to live and work on the land. The landowner would provide a furnish, which was a line of credit at the local store so that they could get their, food necessities and things like that. And then upon harvest, the sharecropper gave a portion of the crop, usually half, to the landowner and used any profits that they received to pay towards their debt, but it was never enough to pay off their debt. All right. Okay. Mississippians came into the 20th century with an agricultural economy based on cotton. Almost 75% of Mississippi people lived and worked on farms. World War I brought temporary prosperity to Mississippi farmers. Wartime demands forced up the price of cotton, but this only lasted from 1914 to 1919. During World War I, Camp Shelby trained armed forces and Ingalls Shipyard built battleships. That's just some extra information not on your sheet. All right. The Great Depression of the 1930s was the deepest and longest economic decline in American history. Eventually, more than 30% of all Americans lost their jobs. So if you will look at point 6 on your sheet where it says the Great Depression and you have A, B, C, and D, go ahead and star all of that because you will need to know all of that on the midterm. Now, you're not going to need to recite these precise numbers and statistics. You just need to recognize that the Great Depression caused these things, okay? So point A, the Great Depression of the 1930s was the deepest and longest economic decline in American history. The price of cotton dropped. 10% of farmers lost their lands when they couldn't pay back their debts. And the state government of Mississippi went bankrupt. Again, you just need to make sure you know all of that for the midterm. You don't have to recite it, you don't have to write about it, you just need to recognize it. Franklin D. Roosevelt and the federal government fought the Great Depression with a program called the New Deal. So Franklin D. Roosevelt. They used money from the federal government to give farmers money to buy tractors and land, and this stimulated the cotton economy in Mississippi. Then point D, World War II also sent cotton prices up, and sharecropping began to disappear because there were new jobs in industry. So new jobs were becoming available in factories and industry, and this was a way out for the sharecroppers. So sharecropping began to disappear during this time. During World War II, Mississippi's farm population declined by 25%. In the 50 years following World War II, the Mississippi farm economy changed because farming became mechanized. Cotton production had always required a lot of manual labor, but now the crop could be planted and harvested with fewer people. This also helped lead to sharecropping disappearing because there was less of a need. All right. Jumping into industry, both Democrats and Republicans favored industry. They wanted Mississippians to have new factories and to lose their dependence on agriculture and cotton. So tax exemptions were offered to new factories. Unfortunately, Mississippi was too poor to build industry on their own, so they decided to offer tax exemptions to outside companies to come into the state of Mississippi and build industry there. The sawmills in the piney woods counted as factories, and lumber production was the state's largest industrial product. Most of Mississippi factories were small, and some things hindered Mississippi's industrial growth, like Mississippi lacked coal, which was the cheap fuel source at that time, and many Mississippians were poorly educated and tied to farming by debt or habit. My dog wants to come in, Maggie. All right. Enter something called BAWI. What does BAWI stand for? Balancing agriculture with industry. So this was an attempt, again, for Mississippi to go industrial. In 1936, legislatures passed a law with a plan called BAWI that gave tax exemptions for 10 years to industries. Put a little star by that because that will be on your midterm. BAWI gave tax exemptions to industries. The people and government of Mississippi, like I said, were too poor to finance the building of industry, so this was meant to bring in new industry into the state. This was to incentivize companies to begin building industries within the state of Mississippi. World War II brought a quick end to the Depression. World War II, that's point E, brought a quick end to the Depression. And World War II had brought shipbuilding to the state with Ingalls Shipyard, and Camp Shelby trained Army troops, and Keesler Air Force Base brought jobs to Biloxi. Mississippi's economy today has become modernized and diversified. In 1900, 3 of every 4 Mississippians worked on a farm. Today, 75% of all Mississippians make their living from factories, trade, or government. And that is it for your notes. So don't turn the video off yet. We're not done. But hopefully that will help you. Make sure you have all the blanks filled up. You can rewind as you need to and go back and listen. Make sure you have all the blanks filled up. You will pass these in next week, September 11th, when you come to class, and you will receive points for it. I'll get them back to you the next week so that you can use them to study for the midterm. All right, quick review for the midterm. What was the earliest and most famous road in Mississippi? I wish I could get some feedback from y'all, but I can't. Hopefully you know is the Natchez Trace Parkway. What area was especially open to economic development by the railroad boom? That is the Piney Woods. Which war destroyed Mississippi's cotton economy? And you should have said the Civil War. What event caused cotton prices to fall, 10% of Mississippians to lose their land, and the state government to go bankrupt? You should have said the Great Depression. Explain the process of sharecropping. I'm not going to get into that here, but again, go back and read pages 67 to 71 in chapter 4 of your book and get a good idea of what all is entailed in the process of sharecropping. In 1936, the plan called VAWI gave tax exemptions for 10 years to whom? And the answer is industries. All right, let's see what you remember from chapter 2. What region of Mississippi has soil that is thin and especially subject to erosion? And the answer is the lowest bluffs. What has influenced the history of Mississippi more than any other geographical feature? The answer is the Mississippi River. What are the two main tributaries of the Mississippi River in the state of Mississippi? You should have said the Yazoo and the Big Black. What are the three main elements of the Great Flood of 1927? I'm not going to get into all that, but you should be able to go through your notes and hit those highlights there. Remember, there were 3 points: where it happened, how did it happen, and what was the result. All right, let's go way back to chapter 1 and see what you remember for that. What states border Mississippi? They are Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, and Arkansas. What parallel makes up the southern border of Mississippi? It is the 31st parallel. Which way do lines of latitude run? They run east to west. Which way do lines of longitude run? They run north to south. When was the Mississippi Territory formed? 1798. What was the capital of the new territory? It was Natchez. What two modern-day states were included in the territory? They were Mississippi and Alabama. And which Mississippi region is made up of an alluvial plain? And that answer is the Delta. All right. All of these questions that we've reviewed are going to be on your midterm. So if you know the answers to those, you should ace it so far. All right. Assignment for next week, very easy. Just read chapter 5. And something someone asked last week, and I didn't give you an answer. Now you know the midterm exam will be October 2nd. So you still have about a month to get through it. It's basically, it will cover chapters 1 through 7. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how far we're going to be going. Yeah, so make sure that you're studying, going over your notes. If you have any questions, reach out.